Hey everybody, Daniel from Spacedock here, and I'm back with another top 5 list. This time, Dreadnoughts. Dreadnought meaning literally fear nothing. These are the biggest, scariest ships in science fiction, and I think it's about time they made it onto a Spacedock top 5 list. So without further ado, let's get right into it. First up, in 5th place, it's a ship recently covered on Spacedock, the Nova-class Earth Alliance Dreadnought from Babylon 5. This is one of the smaller ships on this list, despite being really rather large, 1,500 meters long, but that's mostly because the things to come are titanic in proportions. This is a little more realistically scaled with the rest of its navy, and it is essentially just a mounting platform for 18 massive twin cannons. It is a huge set of guns strapped to an engine. The ship was introduced in the Dilgar War, and later served as the basis for the Omega-class destroyer. I like to think that the time passage had made a ship that size now classified as a destroyer as a result of the advancing technology of the Earth Alliance. But it could also simply be that the Nova's extremely offensive posture and role was determinative of its name. Clearly, the Nova class carries no centrifuge hab and instead has its crew floating around in zero-G, much like the Olympus and Hyperion classes, and the ship is designed only for very short-range operations, not being able to sustain itself in proper long-term journeys or really have a great deal of adaptability beyond simply dropping mountains of firepower into a single target at short range. The ship also carries a complement of Aurora-class Star Furies, so it does have some kind of fighter defense, even though it's fairly limited in the point defense front. We see this ship fight in a lot of engagements in the Earth-Minbari War, mostly in the TV movie In the Beginning. One particular shot shows one of these ships ramming a Sharling-class warcruiser and destroying it, which is one of the only instances we see a Sharling-class destroyed, certainly by humans, in the course of the Babylon 5 story, and presumably one of a single-digit number of casualties ship-wise the Minbari suffered in that entire war, as it was a very one-sided conflict. Later in its life, during the events of Babylon 5 itself, the Nova class is mostly used as a troop transport. We see it in the episode Gropos, carrying a massive number of Earth Force Marines, which it later deploys to a sort of border conflict that's happening somewhere. Overall, this is a nice kind of image at the life of an older warship here. There's a lot we can read into it just by its design, and we can see how it's gone through various phases and become used in different fashions as it's got older and become replaced by the Omega class and later by the Warlock class. Personally, this is one of my favourite Babylon 5 designs. I've always thought all of the Earth Force human stuff was fantastic in B5. That show was very, very good at doing grounded and memorable human spacecraft designs. Just a really fantastic ship overall. Next up, in 4th place, it's the Asari Dreadnought Destiny Ascension from Mass Effect. Now, I was surprised to find some people online who don't like this ship. It seems like on certain forums it's kind of disliked, and the logic behind that was that it's not in keeping with normal Mass Effect ship design, in that it's not focused on length in order to have the longest possible main gun to increase its firepower. But I think the fact that it isn't like that is by design. It's meant to look like it's above and beyond the limitations of conventional ship design in this world. The Asari are supposed to be the oldest and most powerful of the current generation of main council races, and for all we know, their propulsion and weapon systems are completely different to anything the Turians or humans use. It's even been carefully restricted what we know about this ship in the codex, etc. I have no idea what that gap in the middle is for. It could be a through deck for access to hangar bays and things. It could be a giant cannon. It could even be the ship's propulsion system. That seems like a possibility. I don't know what the blue glow is meant to be. Maybe it's some kind of bizarre drive that defies all of the standards you'd expect from a Mass Effect ship. Either way, this does its job as an aspect of the story. It's a giant cruciform cathedral-like ship that makes you wonder about the crazy technology behind it, which is exactly what it should do. You could immediately pick this out as the Asari ship if you were to line up all of the main race's vessels and force somebody to guess which one was which based on what they know about the races in person. It's a really awesome design overall, and I like its kind of background role in the Mass Effect series bubbling away, particularly how it returns if you saved it in the first game and then it comes back in Mass Effect 3 in a big kind of heroic moment. Also, props to the game for kind of pointing out a common flaw of Dreadnoughts in this, that the ship actually gets swarmed and is in danger of destruction in Mass Effect 1 from only Geth attack ships. Sovereign itself doesn't attack the Ascension, it goes straight past it. But the Ascension is dying because it is outflanked and swarmed, and it's unable to react or turn fast enough to deal with that many small targets when it's not accompanied by a battle group. It seems that the Asari are as much restricted by the usual traits of a Dreadnought and the usual shortcomings that need to be accounted for by other ships as anyone else. And as I've said many times, I love seeing ships in science fiction that are meant to be part of a whole and to have their flaws accommodated for by other ships that themselves have flaws. Ships that can do everything are not particularly interesting to me, and I'm glad that even for the amazing angelic futuristic Asari, they still showed them restricted in this capacity. Great ship overall, awesome piece of Mass Effect lore. In third place, the ECLIPSE-class Star Dreadnought from Star Wars, and now we're getting into some of the truly ridiculous stuff. This thing is 17,500 meters long, one of the largest ships ever recorded in Star Wars. Though it is shorter than the Executor class, it's a lot bulkier and has a lot more mass to it, and as it stands, the class is completely reserved to Legends continuity. In those stories, it was a prototype vessel designed to mount a coaxial super laser, a lighter version of the super weapon carried by the Death Star. This one was capable of not destroying a planet, but destroying large continents, and also destroying pretty much any spacefaring warship in a single blast. The ship was built at Kuat Drive Yards and finished just after the Battle of Endor. There was a large conflict over it in the expansion pack for Empire at War, Forces of Corruption, and then the ship played a prominent role in the classic Dark Empire comic series as the flagship of the reborn Emperor Palpatine. A second one was later built called Eclipse 2 that was also destroyed. The ship is crewed by 88,000 people and carries a massive complement of 550 heavy turbo lasers, 500 conventional turbo lasers, 75 ion cannons. The ship has 100 tractor beam projectors and 10 gravity well generators to provide a ludicrous level of redundancy on the interdicting front. The ship also carries 600 TIE interceptors, 96 bombers, and an enormous ground invasion complement including 100 AT-ATs and 5 prefabricated garrison bases. When all is counted up and including gunners and additional personnel, the number of people on board this ship is normally closer to 700,000, and we can safely assume that it has something like the kind of rail jets we see on the Malevolence to facilitate getting around this ship, as it is essentially a city in space, which would take an incredibly long time to navigate on foot. The ship was a fairly rare sight in Star Wars Legends, though it always maintained its place as one of the biggest and scariest ships ever added to that franchise. And while I'm normally not a huge fan of all-purpose do-everything mega ship superweapon things, I've got to say this did it a hell of a lot better than the First Order's giant ridiculous mega thing from The Last Jedi. The Eclipse in its size and scope already pushes the boundaries of common sense and is fairly ridiculous, but the Eclipse at least fits the personality of Emperor Palpatine, who was always more concerned with building the super weapon of the week than he was with having a varied and well-assembled navy. Overall, a very stark and impressive design. I love the name Eclipse, even Ty Bazan comments on that. I love the huge keel structure at the bow. I like the choice to make this a little bit meatier and bulkier to set it apart from the Executor class, and I think it's with good reason that this ship has kind of taken on a life of its own among Star Wars fans and ship enthusiasts. In second place, it's the JEM'HADAR Dreadnought from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I love DS9, I love the Dominion. I think they're probably the most interesting adversary faction in Star Trek. They're kind of a mirror of the Federation. They have the same structure of different races doing different roles. They were a really well thought out set of villains for a fantastic show, and I particularly love their homegrown Gamma Quadrant warship designs, the grey and purple ships used by the JEM'HADAR and Vorta. And the greatest among these is the JEM'HADAR Dreadnought, introduced in the episode Valiant and seen again in the finale at the Battle of Cardassia Prime. This foregoes some of the more kind of elegant, curved design structures of the smaller JEM'HADAR cruisers and attack ships, and has a lot more of a sturdy, bulky, layered, armoured hull style to it. It's very lean and aggressive and powerful, and I'm really glad they went out of their way to design a Dreadnought for the episode Valiant instead of just using a scaled-up version of the JEM'HADAR cruiser or whatever. I mean, the USS Valiant was so hopelessly outclassed that just about any JEM'HADAR warship would have been enough of a threat to make the episode work, but having it be this unique experimental Dreadnought that's really changing the shape of the war made for a really fantastic detail. We don't really know anything about the ship. There are no alpha cannon dimensions or weapon complements or anything like that, so there's not too much I can say on it, but I do really like seeing it on screen. I wish we got a little bit more of it. It's almost like a Star Trek take on a Star Wars style ship. The way it has those kind of over-the-shoulder nacelles laid down near the main hull, as well as the wingtip nacelles, but on top of that it also has a kind of Star Destroyer style array of impulse engines on the aft. This really was the Bismarck of the Dominion War, and even if it didn't get too much screen time, I'm glad we did get to see it kick the crap out of a ship full of Wesley Crushers in that one episode. Fantastic design from a fantastic faction in one of the best pieces of TV science fiction of all time. And in first place, what else could it be but the quintessential science fiction dreadnought, the giant dagger that is the Executor class. When they first rolled this ship out in The Empire Strikes Back and it casts the shadow over the Imperial class ships around it, it's got to be one of the most memorable entrances for a ship design in sci-fi history. And while these days everybody and their mum can write up some kind of random giant ship for sci-fi series, this introduction took the time to make sure that the true scale of this thing was truly implied. And as you should do, you sit in awe of how vast this thing is. We know how huge Star Destroyers are from the previous film, and now we see something that absolutely dwarfs the Imperial class, 100 times more massive than the standard Imperial one. The Executor class was also treated with the right amount of deference and gravitas in the fiction that it should have been. The Empire never built many of these, and when they lost one of them, it was a very big deal. Most of the time when they're destroyed in EU material in Legends, they're destroyed by catching them when they're in dry dock, or through some kind of force shenanigans, or some other extenuating circumstances. The Executor itself in the Battle of Endor was of course destroyed simply because of the incompetent plan put in place by Palpatine, and quite a lot of luck on the part of the Rebel Alliance, though perhaps not on the part of the poor A-Wing pilot who was plastered against its bridge. The ship carries 2,000 turbo lasers and 2,000 additional heavy turbo lasers, as well as hundreds of concussion missile tubes and ion cannons and point defense weapons, plus a massive fighter complement and hundreds of shuttles and a giant invasion force. This ship was a fleet unto itself, and I must concede it does fully go against my usual desires for more grounded designs that complement each other's roles, as this is definitely a do-everything ship. It's the best looking, most memorable do-everything ship that's ever been rolled out, but it is nonetheless a do-everything ship. Its point defense is not limited like normal Star Destroyers are. It has plenty of point defense and fighters. This thing can do its job without an escort fleet. Perhaps its only real shortcoming is that its fighter complement isn't perhaps as enormous as you might expect it to be, but it is still more than enough. I think of all of the crazy Star Dreadnoughts that have been rolled out for Star Wars, the Vengeance class and the Eclipse class and now the Mega class, this is definitely the best looking one. There's something about how relatively flat it is compared to its length that makes it look like it's just cutting through space like a hot knife. Just a truly iconic ship, one of the Star Wars franchise's best contributions to ship design, and I think well deserving of this first place position on this list. This is Daniel from Spacedock, signing off. Thank you for watching Spacedock. If you're interested in supporting the channel, please do check out the links on the screen right now or in the description below for our Patreon and channel membership services. Anything you can pledge goes towards improving our team and our equipment and allowing us to put together bigger and more exciting video projects for you guys on the channel.